Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Dutiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Dutiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. Tatiyampi Buddhaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Dhammaṃ saranang gacchāmi, Tatiyampi Sanghaṃ saranang gacchāmi. So I hope that everybody's keeping well wherever might be. And I've come back here to the Pilikutua area after a trip to Colombo and very short day trip to Yala. Take a look at a monastery. And while in Colombo, I had this problem with my ankle, and I got given these exercises by a really excellent physiotherapist. And usually what I was doing was previously I'd feel like a pain somewhere, and I'd try to figure out an exercise to hit the area that had that pain. And over the course of your life, you learn a lot of these kind of like different exercises, so you can improvise. You can kind of find ways to move around that kind of hit the area. Now this fellow, I went to see him and he gave me a bunch of different exercises. He told me to do certain exercises, and when I went to do them, I was completely unable. And the interesting thing was with these exercises, one of them was to lift your hands up like this, which if I'm sitting like this, I can't do, or very difficult to do, but if I'm standing, it's no problem at all to do it. And there's other ones like that too, where he just adjusted my body very slightly, and after the adjustment, it was clear that I just didn't have the strength to do this exercise. So some of these issues kind of been building up over years. I had the different injuries to my back and things like this, and of course I've been doing exercises that help them, but certain exercises, certain areas of the problem hadn't been addressing properly. And just through the normal wear and tear of using the body, these kind of areas can get exacerbated. So it's kind of an interesting simile for me, or an interesting simile anyway, because this kind of can relate to our practice of meditation as well. There's sometimes areas in our mind, we think that we are going along fine, that things are going fine, and then this immense suffering comes up. We don't know where it comes from. In some of the time, it's related to a very slight way that we're directing our mind that seems innocuous, seems like it's not a big deal, but this is causing problems that have built up, and have been exacerbated. This is causing problems that now come to us and create huge amounts of suffering that we don't know how to deal with. So when we go to practice meditation, it's important to have this kind of all-around viewpoint, this viewpoint that looks not just, say, am I getting angry, or am I getting angry? Why am I flying off the handle completely in this situation, getting really angry, really suffering a lot, and in this other situation that's very similar, I'm not suffering at all. I was chatting with a fellow monk the other day, and sometimes monks, the way that monks interact is generally very cordial and things, but this monk, I was saying some things that kind of tweaked him. It was kind of nothing big. I said, we were talking about directions, like where's the direction to this or that place? And I said, this place is located in the southeast. And he got really upset. He said, well, from here it's not to the southeast. And it turns out this particular monk, he has a lot of experience going into the forest. And so he has kind of a certain amount of like pride around that, or a certain amount of self-identity built up around that, one could say, and everybody has it in different areas. But my saying this direction to the southeast is, this is located in the southeast, and I was talking about the country as a whole, and he wanted me to talk from where we were located then. He got quite upset about that. So if one is trying to eliminate anger, and one notices one isn't getting angry towards things in general, then one flies off the handle, or one gets really, really upset. And what's the cause of this? And it's sometimes it's something very minor like this. We're not directing our resistance towards anger in the right directions. And sometimes it's these very minor things. It's sometimes often related to a strength that one doesn't want to look at, one doesn't want to see, and one doesn't want to resist in these directions. And it's because of not doing this technique in the proper way, then anger is not eliminated. And it's similar to the body. I can lift my arms standing up like this, or backing up like this, no problem. Come forward, this is very hard. So when we come to practice, sometimes we want to look for these areas where it's just a slight adjustment, just a slight tweak, and it's almost impossible. It's very difficult for us to do. Oftentimes, there's sometimes very good to go in areas where it's easy to do and build strength in those areas. But it's the areas where it's just a slight twist, just a slight adjustment, and we can't do it. It's something that's really difficult to do. Sometimes we have to go into those areas and exercise them bit by bit. I was chatting with somebody not long ago, and we were talking a little bit about Asubha Kamatana, kind of Asubha Bhavana and these kind of things. And we're chatting a bit about the way that lust operates. And this person they didn't seem to have much problems with that. But we got to chatting a little bit about sweat, and just kind of over the course of questioning. And it turned out this person had a very strong aversion to sweat, like sweaty, smelly things. And I said, well, this is, a portion of lust is directed there. Although it may be hidden, although it may not be something that we can clearly see, it's there, and it comes out in terms of one's liking for clean, beautiful, or not necessarily beautiful, but clean, nice smelling, things, or a body, or whatever it might be. So if this is the case, and say anger is coming up over a very small area where we don't want to look, or lust is coming up, and we have these aversion to sweat, sometimes the only way to eliminate this particular defilement is to confront it. And it's to confront it in these very slight ways. One might have to go sit beside some smelly people on a bus or something like this and see what happens to the mind. Learn to resist this feeling of disgust, because it's coupled with this feeling of disgust that lust arises. Or if one is suffering a lot from anger, one may not get angry if if another person, say, is relaxed in their behavior. But if one notices that another person is strict in their behavior, then one gets angry about that. Why is this guy so strict? And one has to go towards that. One has to go and hang out more with people who are a little bit more strict to see if it tweaks one's anger and to see how one can stop it. Sometimes these very slight movements are areas that one doesn't want to look. And I remember when I was a young man, when I was a little kid, I used to like to dig rocks out of the soil. Sometimes you go to dig these rocks out, and some would be very small. They'd have a little tip at the top of the soil. And you'd go to dig it out, and it would take a couple minutes. Other ones, you go to dig around this rock that just had a tip at the top of the soil, and you keep digging. It was this immense stone. And imagine sometimes you couldn't even really remove it as like a 10-year-old kid. You might need like a backhoe to remove this stone. And yet the tip of it is very small. So in practicing meditation, it's good not to overlook these very small areas where we can't go, where it's difficult to maneuver, where there's just almost no strength at all. Connected to those sometimes are the very defilements that are causing us to suffer a lot. So just like this doctor gave several different exercises to hit these weak areas, one has to go into these weak areas and do the exercise. But it's interesting, it's not just that all of the time, because the doctor, in order to combat this kind of weakness that I had in my ankle, he gave me exercises for my shoulder, for my neck, for my back, for many other things. Over the years, this kind of injury had spread and caused weakness in all these different parts of the body. So our practice is also similar. If we're getting angry, if we have lust, the weakness that comes from our inability to resist that may be coming from a lapse in sila. It may be coming from a lapse in generosity. So the Buddha gives this kind of all-around training that one has to protect. Now, the fabric gets weak in one area,
of a person's practice, that weakness leads to an inability in another area. So one has to go to these areas where it's difficult, but one also has to go to areas that are difficult, not just in, say, the area that's making one angry, the area that's making one lustful. One also has to protect, guard, and strengthen other areas of one's practice in generosity, in virtue, that may seem to be completely unrelated. Because just like the body, the mind is an entire system, and this system functions as a whole. A strength in one area of the body can shore up another area. A weakness in one area of the body can make another area weak. So when we come to practice, we have to learn to develop the proper techniques, the proper approaches, even if it's a slight adjustment. And we have to look at the whole pattern, the pattern from sila, the pattern for one's samadhi, the pattern for one's panya, the pattern for one's generosity, the pattern for one's meditation, the pattern for one's precepts. All of these things form a complete whole. And where are the areas in which we're weak? Where are the areas in which it's almost impossible to lift the arm, although a slight movement and it's no problem? These are the areas for growth in a person's practice, because just like a rock, kind of when it's lodged in the ground, the tip, it may just seem very small at the tip. When we go to dig it out, it can be an enormous boulder. And it's these areas underneath the ground, these areas that are hidden, where quite a lot of suffering can come. And similarly, if we remove the boulder, if we look into these areas that are difficult, if we strengthen the areas that are weak, then we find that we can do things that we couldn't do before. So this is a pathway that we can take, and sometimes we need to take when we've developed our strengths but we're still suffering, is to look into the areas where we're weak, look into the slight adjustments that we find difficult to do, and make them strong, so that the fabric of our mind can become resilient, and so that we can move forward on the path to Nibbana. Okay, so I think leave that for reflection, and wishing everybody all the blessings of Dhamma practice.